Iron Maiden Senjutsu is out, and that means only one thing, that we can finally divide ourselves into two camps, with one saying this prog metal isn't true Iron Maiden, and the other one shaming the unfaithful for ever doubting the band. Shame! And since we recently launched a new Up the Iron series on the show, let's take a look at what is inside the Iron Maiden's 17th studio album, and then hopefully answer the question of whether this still feels like Iron Maiden, and how we would place it in the band's discography. Alright, here you go. Right from the opening notes of the intro piece, which is entrusted to the title track, it becomes clear that with this record, Iron Maiden is not intending to prove anything to anyone. The band will continue broadening the limits of their own sound and letting their prog influences out instead of going down a more convenient and straightforward path. Senjutsu is probably the most definitive song of the entire album as a whole. It is grand sounding, somewhat dark, and yet not really melancholic. It definitely sets the mood for an entire album, so if you aren't an Iron Maiden fan, yet you kinda wanna find out what all the fuzz is about, this would be your track to check out. By the way, according to Adrian Smith, this track, and the album title of course, is inspired by the Japanese drumming art, which I personally think is absolutely stunning. It is then followed by the album's second single, Stratego, and it is a real energy booster. It brings you that more familiar Iron Maiden, mixing the 80s sound with that of the post-reunion era, and the band's trademark gallop fits very well with the melodic chorus and definitely shines some light through the dark ambiance developed by the album opener, paving the way and building anticipation for what is next. Thus, the writing on the wall which follows could not be placed any better on this record. I'll be quite honest with you, I was a little bit unimpressed by the straightforwardness of this track when it came out. What? I still liked it, I just wasn't really impressed. And yet for some reason, the writing on the wall sounds actually much better for me personally when you listen to it among other tracks on this record. And this brings us to the first conclusion about Senjutsu. This album is not really an album of singles. Most likely it is not the record from which I will isolate favorite tracks and go back and re-listen to those, but would rather come back to an album as a whole, much as I actually do right now with its predecessor. By the way, a fun fact, Adrian actually wrote this song and the title for it without actually knowing the story behind it, only the popular expression. So when he brought it to Bruce Dickinson, Bruce said, yeah, we can, write something about Belshazzar's feast. And then he had to explain it to Adrian before they proceeded. So anyways, while the song actually ends on an upbeat note, on Lost in a Lost World the band once again slows down. And in such way, Iron Maiden is actually taking you on an emotional and rhythmical roller coaster.
All is not, it seems to be on the outside.
Overall, I gotta say that with 16 albums behind them, Steve Harris and the team know pretty well how to construct a record to keep a listener engaged for an entire album, placing the more aggressive pieces at exactly the right places in between the slower and slightly longer tracks. Just like with Days of Future Past, actually another one written by Adrian Smith and Bruce Dickinson, which I think is pretty obvious from its tune. Once again, after a rather complicated Lost in a Lost World, which clearly followed the structure the band had mastered on Brave New World, Iron Maiden includes a rather straightforward and speedy rocket. Once again, Mr. Smith came up with both the music and the song's title, which Bruce Dickinson expanded into a song about an immortal human being traveling the world and basically all the ups and downs of, living forever on this earth.
Here's an opportunity to be creative.
But it wouldn't really be Iron Maiden if they would have written just one song about time travel though, right? Time Machine proves its title and sound-wise takes you back to the year 2003, for it could well fit on Dance of Death album. Even though it's only 7 minutes long, and I'm saying only because for Senjutsu that's definitely on the shorter side. It is packed with various tempo and melody changes, yet still has that one guitar lick which is running as a thread through the entire song, so basically exactly like the structure on Dance of Death. And thus ends side A of Senjutsu. And for me it actually ends only figuratively because I'm still waiting for my red vinyl and I'm bound to enjoy it only digitally for now. But since it is a double album and the band actually intended for us to have a little break, I'd just like to remind you to not hesitate to comment on anything you hear or see in this video, especially when you disagree with me, because the whole point of this video is actually to start a conversation.
Write that down, write that down!
On Darkest Hour, the band once again revisits British history and namely the most tragic events during the first term of the legendary Winston Churchill. Yet if you expect a follow-up to Aces High, this is definitely not what you will get.
We buried our sons, returned and fled.
It is truly the darkest song on the album, both lyric-wise and in terms of its ambiance. In a way, I actually see it as an antipode to The Writing on the Wall, which assures us that if we work together and are led by those who believe in what is right, we might actually be not so doomed after all.
Not for the last time, we'll stand alone.
Death of the Celts definitely feels like an older and more mature brother of the Clansman, the strongest track from the weakest Iron Maiden album.
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
By the way, guys, I hate those comparisons with older tracks, and I know that I did that a couple of times on this album, but I simply couldn't resist with this one. Just like the next one, The Parchment, will remind me of Power Slave. I actually think that Death of the Celts might be the only song on this record which is written in the major key. But if I am wrong, please do not hesitate to correct me on that one.
Lord above, my spirit says, death is not proud, no more, no less.
Either way, after a rather uplifting song, the band once again lets us go on an enchanting journey with 5-minute long solos by the guitarist trio on The Parchment. So now that we almost got to the end of the record, we can actually confirm the statement that we made in the very beginning that this album is crafted like an emotional roller coaster. And just like in the very beginning of the album, it always starts at a low point and then slowly starts building the melody, the suspicion, the energy, and after its climax, it always drops back down. And this actually happens 4 times on this album, with the 5th one being the final track of the record. Just like the opening track, Hell on Earth accumulates everything this album has and everything Iron Maiden is actually famous for, including of course the trademark galloping and overall an exquisite rhythm section, masterful guitar solos, and of course exquisite job by Bruce Dickinson, who, by the way, after all he's been through, sounds absolutely amazing on this record. Just like with any other track on this record, I cannot really say that Hell on Earth is the strongest one, yet I'm absolutely sure that out of all of the tracks on Senjutsu, this one is a perfect album closer. So does this album still sound like Iron Maiden? Definitely yes. Does it sound like Iron Maiden you fell in love with? Well, it really depends on how old are you and when you actually discovered Iron Maiden. If you're following the band, you actually know that Iron Maiden have actually been quite consistent and letting their creative prog influences out since after the reunion album Brave New World they actually got their creative freedom back. So in such ways Senjutsu is actually quite consistent with what the band has been showing us in the past 20 years.
Yes, that's true.
And at this point in their career, I actually do not think that anyone should be expecting them to produce an album like what they did in the early 80s. I would actually be much more surprised if they would drop another Killers or Peace of Mind on us. So is it a good heavy metal album? Definitely yes. But if you ask me which track is my personal favorite from Senjutsu, I'd have no idea. The weird thing about it is that there is not even one single track on this record, on the entire album, to which I wanted to come back and re-listen to it individually, yet I actually wanted to go back and re-listen the entire album again and again and again and again and again. Yes, I listened to it gazillion times today.
I love it.
And what about you guys? What do you personally think about Senjutsu? And do you have a favorite track from this record or not really? Please let us know in the comments. And more than anything, I actually would like to know what you personally thought of the singles which were released prior to Senjutsu. Are they representative of the album or not really? As always, thank you so much for watching guys and keep rocking.